Let's hear briefly Professor Kwesi Botchwey when he took his stand at the Central University. Let's just hear a bit of what he had to say, and then we'll come and interrogate the issues that he had to raise in respect of the economy and the way forward.
At the last election, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of tension, if you recall. A number of civil society representatives played a very key role in helping to diffuse the tensions. The Council of Churches among them. But the best way we can diffuse these tensions, I think, is to ensure that there is inclusivity in everything we do. And secondly, that when it comes to this contestation for resources, for the award of contracts, and so on, we ensure that the rules are even, that the playing field is even, that the rules are transparent and clear, that no one feels they will be left out merely because they don't belong. I think that so long as people have this sense of inclusivity and of principle in the management of the economy, perhaps this will subside. And I think that that is the way to do this collectively. That was a one-shot thing in Senchi. The process is continuing. I know that the President himself is anxious to ensure that there is greater participation and reaching out to everybody. So that the MPP didn't show up in Senchi, I hope, doesn't mean that there will not be in the life of this continuing dialogue any participation by the NPP.
Professor Kwesi Botchwey, that's your longest serving finance minister. He took a stand at the Distinguished Speaker Series that's organized by the Central University College, and he came right after Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia had delivered his just a few months back. Now, he was speaking under the theme, State of the Nation's Political Economy and the Role of Civil Society. Just a few quotes from him. He first of all began by applauding Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, and he says, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, whose credentials I respect, I offer no rebuttals to his lecture. I do agree with much of what he had to say. And he went on to speak about the need for the country to build policy credibility, which he says was lacking. He describes the Bank of Ghana measure as one that was a panic measure and needs to be looked at. He looks at the last year's budget and wages and public debt alone accounting for about 82% and government being left with only 18% to spend on everything else. And that made a big difference. And it's part of the reason we are where we are at this moment. He spoke about corruption and asked government to be swift in dealing with corruption so that people will have confidence in the manner in which the leadership deals with corruption. He captures the mood of the people. And this is where I want you to take it from. He says, I see a nation reeling in widespread dissatisfaction, a bit of despair and angst, a popular mood marked by frustration arising from cynicism about any explanation, assurances by government and technocrats, a feeling that everybody in public office is engaged in corruption and money grabbing.
I think Dr. Botchwey put his finger right on the subject out there. I mean, it's a very sad situation. For me, you know, even though I'm not a public officer now, I feel very sad for those who are holding public office. Because the whole nation, it's like everybody is a thief, as it were. Once you are holding a public office, whether an MP, they castigate you. In the executive, they castigate you. In the judiciary, they it's not correct. We need to build institutions, and we need to strengthen the people there. We need to give them encouragement. We need to let people who perform public office believe that they are doing something for the health of the country. And they must also give us reason to believe in them. I think Dr. Botchwey really said that to do this, one of the things that we expect is that unity of purpose. You understand? There must be a consensus. All the parties, everybody must believe that it is possible for a Ghanaian to perform. You know, if, for instance, I'm in the opposition, I'm not saying whether NDC or NPP, and the IGP or the police makes a decision, they won't agree. You understand? Because, you know, it happened when NDC was in opposition. It also happened when the NDC today is NPP is in opposition. We say we won't agree. We are not sure that the police is, what do you call it, neutral. Then we undermine that central state authority. There's a need for consensus. Now, what is it? That century consensus, for me, is one of the most beautiful things that ever happened. To see my very good friend, Mr. Kwame Pianim, and others sitting out there, looking at the problems in of the country, like the perennial floods. We all know that the economy is in crisis. It's not today. It's been in crisis because of the structure of our economy. You understand? We're just exporting and all that. We have the EPA thing we'll come to. You know, how much are we manufacturing? How much of our efforts are we getting? What are we getting for so much of our efforts? So we need to build consensus. We need to admit that these are our weaknesses. This is what we do, but we will show up people, we support. When it's your turn to serve, we'll back you, we'll criticize you, but at the same time we'll do this.
He identifies
CSOs.
Chronic borrowing as part of the problem.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, but chronic borrowing for what? What, you know, we must, the independent body, like that century thing, must go beyond just the talk shop. Like, I'm sorry, my very good friend and colleague, PV, died, but that was his program, that we should go beyond, we should examine the document. What did we spend the money on? Did we borrow for purposes of building, you know, NDC or MPP or whatnot? Do we have to do that? How much money do we put into party organizations? You know, all of us. How much money do we put in? Can the budget, for instance, carry the issue of political campaigning? Does it make sense to put a little money into political parties so that political parties will not, you know, put their energies into raking money to run their organizations? There are so many questions, and I think that Dr. Botchwey really said just what every standard economist, you know, will understand or knows. Dr. Bawumia, he complimented, and it's obvious because what he was saying was that what else can I think it's decent, it's civil for him to compliment a co-economist.
He did not just compliment him. Many times he referred to him and sought to defer to what he had already said and said, I agree.
But don't forget what he said. I mean, Dr. Botchwey, I know his English.
When you go to the analysis of the CD and its fall and what ought to be done, he said Dr. Bawumia has dealt with it. Listen
to Dr. Botchwey. He says, I have that. He said, Dr. Bawumia, whose credentials I respect, I offer no rebuttals to his lecture. I do agree with much of what he said. The news is, which of it does he not agree with? You understand? It will be interesting for him to just say that, I agree with almost everything he said. But the news is really, what part did he not agree with? Then we'll examine it, because that's where the meat is, you understand? So immediately people say, oh, Dr. Botchwey, I agree with everything that he said. He didn't say that. Now, when you put two economies together and you are a president, you have a headache. I'm telling you this. I've seen the economists sit down there and you listen to this one says A, this one says B. You have to put them together for a long time, let them hone out a solution. It's almost impossible. So definitely there are approaches to the economic solution, but one thing he did say, what Dr. Bawumia also said, that the economy is in crisis, and that crisis is not born only by today. It's acting, you know. But we need to come together. And of course, he was not a prophet of doom. He said, we've been there before. We were able to dig ourselves out of it. We can do it again. There I go 100% with Dr. Botchwey. In 1983-84, we were in a worse situation than we are today. We came together as a people. You see, luckily there was no political party at the time, so we pulled ourselves together. Can we, in this divided, polarized society, manage to bring ourselves together to say together we'll pull ourselves from the pit? But of course, when you have either MDC or MPP waiting to point out all your weaknesses and not offer anything so that we can also come to power, you have a problem, you know. But you can't have a consensus as a nation to build upon and then move this country forward. We are in a process of transition from the lower middle, state country into the middle, upper middle. Now the problem there is that people are now going. We will come to that in the EPA. People are withdrawing aid. I think Denmark, specifically, I've said they are not giving us any aid. They want to do business with us. If we think that we are old enough, if we think that now our economy is moving up, why should we keep giving our aid? You are no more kids. We must stand on our feet and then fight them, but it's going to be tough. We have to negotiate properly. We have to have a consensus, on all these things. What we are going to export, what we can produce better. There are some.
Do you agree with Dr. Botchwey, Mr. Joseph, when he says that we appear to be engaged in a race to the bottom? Then he asks the question, are we doomed? He says, of course not. He captures the frustrations of people. And yet, what he does is a clarion call on all of us to rise to the moment and get the country back on and moving. Does it take everybody to fix the economy?
Well, first, I wish to congratulate Professor Botchwey. He spoke as a statesman, not a politician. That's what I love about. I've read the various reports capturing various aspects. I've read about where he congratulates Bawumia. I read about where he agrees with him. I've read about when he challenges us as a people to rise together, and where he charges the government to take responsibility and prosecute corruption urgently. I think that is what a statesman would do. Yeah. As much as possible, they have virtually offered the mood and the what do you call it? The people's anger with public holders. It's all coming from the perception that you get money free, nobody checks you. It is because the reports we are getting, some may not be credible, but nobody is following through to prove that indeed this report, what you heard, is different from what the facts are. Those that are credible, we are not prosecuting them. We come back offering explanations on their behalf. So for me, to get the people to get out of their cynicism.
If I asked you one issue, which has become very topical on the question of corruption, that is not being dealt with, which one would it be?
SUBA, the SUBA Info Solutions. I mean, Professor Botchwey mentioned about 3 or 4 of them. Many of them, what we have are all the newspaper reports. What you hear subsequently, if we were following through to give the true facts, I'm a member of parliament. I'm entitled to have every information on that issue. But there go ask. It will become an issue. You can't. And those ones, I don't blame the executive. I blame us, the MPs. Because rather than standing together as legislature and asking that the information be availed to us so we can sift the chaff from the grain and then we can work with the grain, we become so partisan that we often have only the newspaper reports to work with. And therefore the perception will not go away. It may not be true, but so long as the reports have given credible information. Sada, now there's a challenge. People are, Senior Gogo Wakon is advocating that the report of our friend,
okay. Are you talking about Manasseh Azura Awuni?
Yes. Awuni's report is not true and so on.
Did I say that?
No, he is not.
Precision is important.
All right.
He has sought to bring some facts to bear regarding the questioning of the trees.
Yeah.
And he's printing or discussing the report from the UDS.
Now, if you take all this, how long has it taken since those news broke? What steps have we taken? I was in Tamale for another thing.
There's been a new board. It's been tasked to look into the matter.
Is it the responsibility of the board to investigate crime? If the allegation of crime, we know there is agencies that are responsible. So long as the people do not get assurance that the government is taking steps that will bring wrongdoers to book, we become cynical. Everything you say, we don't take as serious.
As a member of the NPP, you must have felt proud and relieved that Dr. Botchwey was endorsing some of the things that Bawumia had said already after Bawumia came under, a deluge of criticism for
I really
what
am
he had
not.
to say.
I'm not bothered about what people said about Bawumia, because I don't think any honest person would have doubted Bawumia's credibility. For anybody who was honest and reviewed the statement, of course, there's always the politics and the facts. So I only congratulate Professor Botchwey for being a statesman, and I think that after that, we should not spend time on whether we should look forward. The other thing about working together, we can only work together based on something. This is what we are working together to achieve. If you take the budget, right from day one, you know that the budget was not going to move us 1 inch forward. Because, as Dr. Botchwey said, if you take out our statutory payments, and we couldn't even make the statutory payments, if you take out our debt servicing, and you take out incomes, we're left with nothing. Indeed, I recall that my committee reviewing the Attorney General, Ministry of Justice's the budget, we pointed out that the allocation for administration cannot pay the electricity bill of the ministry alone without any of its agencies. So how was the ministry going to perform? In 99%, there was no vote for doing anything.
Is it that serious?
That is how it is.
The item 1.
If you take the salaries out, there was no vote for anything. So they were just being paid
For
doing nothing.
That's very serious.
That is what it is, the budget. And that's why I think that as a country, we should focus on something. In the next 5 years, we want to achieve A, B, C, D, E, irrespective of which government. That one, I will be committed to working to ensure it happens. Okay? But as it is now, we are one country sharing different views about our approach to solving the economic views. If you bring your policy, I will use my philosophy, my view, to review your policy and point out there, in my view, what I consider to be the shortcomings.
Right.
That is the beauty of
Dr.
democracy.
Zakari, he says that we have missed macroeconomic targets in 2 consecutive years, with budget outcomes deviating not marginally, but rather significantly from published forecasts. Now,
talks about our growth rate after 2013.
Yes.
And I'm embarrassed.
And then, he begins to talk about what he thinks could be done and that this ought to be, tackled seriously, and his emphasis on policy credibility. Do you think that's just going to be one of those things, he said it is over, or that you have expectations and hope that the managers of the economy, those who are in the forefront, who are in the seats, will take this and run with it?
Yeah, thank you so much. Listening to Prof. Botchwey, who, everybody has acknowledged has been an icon in economic management and also in politics. One was not surprised to see the level of intelligence, the level of understanding of our economy displayed at the venue. However, you realize that his views, and he didn't just say his views, the views of the group at Senche had some level of convergence with the views that had earlier on been expressed by Dr. Bawumia. And one thing I observed then was that one of the things he said, you know, and what was also a feeling at Senchi, you know, more or less diverged from the viewpoint of Dr. Bawumia. And this thing had to do with the burden of the country by way of the wage bill. He said that 82% of our income could just be attributed to wage bill and interest payments on loans. Yes. It was a clear point of divergence between himself and the view of Dr. Bawumia. Dr. Bawumia had said clearly, and I was really worried about that point, because at that point in time we were close to a consensus, agreeing as a nation that the wage bill was a big problem and we needed to tackle it. But at that venue, he more or less threw everything out of order, and he mentioned, he mentioned that the wage bill was not the problem. However, the problem was the interest payments on loans. Yeah. But when Prof was speaking, he said the 82%, even though he didn't give us the various proportions. However, he recognizes and he mentions that these two things are the major problems that we have: the wage bill and interest payments on loans. So you see that we have two problems when it comes to our problem, our problem of managing our income. Now, what he fell short of doing was to come out clearly to provide us with how to deal with it. He made some attempts in the speech. He talked about whether we can go for a program from IMF, or we decide to go for commercial loans as a result of our elevation from lower from a low-income country to a lower middle-income country. And this particular situation is an arithmetical conclusion that our partners have arrived at.
He said the country can decide that we will not go to IMF for funds. We can decide that instead of medium-term drawing at lower cost from IMF, we will borrow from international markets at greater cost and short tenure, and with pretty much the same conditions.
Yeah, so clearly, if you analyze it, he's telling us to go for a program at IMF, because he's saying that given these conditions, which are incident as a result of our migration from a low-income country to a lower middle-income country, we cannot afford to access concessionary facilities. So our development partners, as Uncle Ato had mentioned, it's not dealing with that with kid gloves anymore. They are saying that we have reached a particular level, and this I must emphasize that it's an arithmetic, a conclusion as a result of our GDP growth that we had posted, and then so it's basically that. But really, the challenges that we are having as a country can be traced to these things. He again mentioned that to address this particular problem again is for us to live within our means. Again, living within our means, we need to dissect that particular statement. And he had already mentioned clearly how we were spending on salaries and spending on interest payments on loans. These interest payments on loans are loans that had been contracted for over a long period of time. You realize that, no, can I finish? Because a number of loans that we have about 10 years moratorium that we will start payment on them, and you notice that if you are paying servicing loans today, it's very likely that these were loans that were contracted 10 years before. So clearly, the interest payments on the loans that have been talked about are loans that are not necessarily contracted today. The loans that we've contracted today, we have not even started servicing them by way of the loan arrangement. So, and these things, we cannot take back the monies to them. So it's a constant. That particular interest payment on loans, we can't do anything about them. We are left with the other aspect of it, which is the salaries. That one, something can be done about it. And there was more or less a consensus when Dr. Okoto mentioned clearly that this particular issue of the wage bill has to be tackled by all, and it's not a partisan issue. But having said that, those of us who are concerned
about...
It's
reference to retrenchment.
I mean, whatever, it has to be discussed. How we're going to address it. There are several ways of addressing it. Whether you're going to have a wage freeze, whether you're going to have retrenchment, whether you're going to have the redeployment. There are several ways of containing a wage bill. But when Dr. Bawumia went there and then changed the gear and moved the direction of the fact that the wage bill was not a problem, then the division arose. So I thought that Prof would have made it concretely clear, even though he said it, but by implication, he could have mentioned it, the way we could go, and it is captured in the Consensus 18. It says that we have to find a way of matching remuneration with productivity. And I thought that, having made this analysis, he would have, hammered
and here we are, you have just been told that we are paying people, just paying their salaries. They have nothing to work with.
That is the key issue. We have to come out clearly on Consensus 18 and ensure that we come together as a nation and implement Consensus 18 and ensure that remuneration is commensurate with productivity. And we have to come up with clear measurable benchmarks that we are going to be able to assess how salaries have improved over the years. Can we actually trace that to a commensurate increase in productivity at the various sectors? That's one. Do
you agree with those who suggest, for example, that we should outsource such class of workers on the payroll, like messengers, gardeners, cooks, and the likes?
No, seriously. These things has to be supported by real, financial analysis with a concrete business case. That's to show that if you outsource a particular service in an institution, this is the outcome that has been demonstrated. And I think that, comparing private sector to public sector, especially in Ghana, private sector has been more successful in trying to match remuneration and productivity. And if we are going to go by these performances of the private sector, it's not bad at all to request for outsourcing of some of these services to the private sector. They are much more likely to be able to perform to match the salaries that have been given them. To just conclude on this thing, I would like to say that the state of the nation has to be in a GA mode to implementing the consensus that we arrived at Senchi. I thought that the platform would have been used to put all together to ask for a movement towards the implementation phase, because we had discussed all this. In fact, what he said there, he himself mentioned that they were not his personal views. These were group views at Senchi.
So he was
he more or less needed
them
to ask all to be on the move for implementation.
Right, Kweku, he says that even though there has been a groundswell of activities by civil society groups, it is time for such groups to refocus just not on the wrongs of government, but also on social mobilization.
Well, he's trying to set an agenda. It's legitimate appeal, and I believe it's just an appeal.
A friend of mine says that 24 million Ghanaians who are problem identifiers, none is implementer.
Yeah, but you see, quite a lot of the civil society groups, the think tanks, the independent think, they've been doing quite well. They prescribe. They identify the problem and they prescribe. The Money Ghana's, the energy group?
Right.
Adam's group, and many others. Third World Network. You may have their problems with some of the ideological stands, but it's a very principled and solid group. They've been prescribing solutions all over the place. The issue is whether the executive or those who are entrusted with responsibility listen to them sufficiently enough, and tap into their knowledge. So there's a problem somewhere along the line. But I think Dr. Botchwey did quite well. You see, he wasn't in competition with Bawumia.
Right.
That's the first thing that we should cut out. He was on an intellectual platform at a university delivering a series of lectures. He acknowledged the credentials of his predecessor in terms of the sequence of the lectures. Right. Yes, he didn't have to go out of his way to point where he disagreed with the gentleman. It wouldn't make sense. That would have been inappropriate in my candid opinion. But if you read his paper carefully, then you get areas where he touched that Bawumia may not have touched, or areas that Bawumia touched, but he touched and gave his own reactions and things to. That's fair. Okay, so for me, the Bawumia Kwesi Botchwey thing really ought to be relegated to the background. It could lead to a distortion of the essence of this whole lecture series. But the areas that Dr. Botchwey, or if you like, Professor Botchwey touched on, is the Bank of Ghana thing, the forest thing. Even street elements like us had made those statements. But now, and Bawumia also highlighted it. Right. Dr. Botchwey has highlighted it. I hope, because from what he says, and my friend was very clear, he's giving us an insight into how his group, the group of macroeconomic environment, dealt with some of these issues that's Senchi. And it's unfortunate we still don't have the full report or the action plans, because that would have given us, but he's giving us hints. You know, it is obvious that the Bank of Ghana thing has collapsed. It's failed. Okay? There are much more dollars out. They are not going in there. So those that they captured, if you like, it's also finishing. You understand? So clearly there's the need for a review on that aspect. I also realized that there were certain things he raised. You see, the energy sector.
Right.
I didn't see much of that in the Bawumia thing, because Bawumia did not really focus on those areas. But you see that Kwesi Botchwey actually raised that area, and we ought to look. It looks as if Senchi discussed it into details. It doesn't reflect so much in the consensus, the 22-point consensus. So I realized people asked questions. Now he's giving us hints along that side, and it is obvious if you read what he's saying there, that that's a critical area that we ought to look at. There was also a part that he raised in terms of the economic management. You see, the ministers that are the presidency and ministers that are outside, where some of their jobs or responsibilities overlap, and they need to streamline, they need to get coordination, and to ensure that the presidency has effective leadership. He thinks that could lead to crisis management in certain areas. That's also an area, of course, Bawumia didn't highlight, but he's highlighted. That's the way to look at the way he's gone about it. I had a problem with, and he's actually told us that Senchi came to almost to the conclusion that the reduction of the wage bill from 57% to 35% by 2017 will not be easily attainable. I've had a problem with the wage bill argument, and I think we've articulated here over and over again. I mean, I'm not too sure that that is the real problem. So on that score, I'm with Bawumia. And indeed, we have been asking for segmentation, you know, to dissect the thing and find...
Well, with Bawumia on the focus on indiscipline.
Physical and monetary indiscipline.
Right.
And virtually, Dr. Botchwey also brings that into context. If you read his thing carefully, you know, look, we've run budget deficits twice in a row. Bawumia predicted that we might do a third one. Dr. Botchwey virtually is saying that 2014,
it will get worse.
It will get worse. It's almost the same language they are speaking from different angles. So to be honest with you, it was a good paper. It's good that we all take some of these things on board. You see, it helps the economic management culture of this country, rather than looking at all those things within the context of political parties or partisan lenses. To that extent, I think it was a very good job he did at the lectures, you know.
You wanted to say...
I have a problem also with the full cost recovery thing. It looks as if it's a tricky area. He gave the alternatives, you know. It is something that ought to be done. If we can't do it, what are the alternatives? That's a tricky area. Yeah. I don't recall Bawumia doing too much about it. Maybe in earlier lectures, but not in the Central University one.
Right. What's your intervention briefly?
You see, there's one line where Dr. Botchwey literally jumped over. You know, you mentioned it, but jumped over. But it traps the core of the debate. That is almost ideological, you know, where he talks about the options. And he said, either we go to, let me put it blank, it's either we go to IMF or we go to the market, you know, the shark market. And, yeah, well, I know, I mean, from 1983, it's been a big debate. Yeah. You know, the Bretton Woods, you know, thing. There are some who are just against it. Whether it is right or not, I'm not here to. But basically, I do not think that, I don't agree with the Senchi position that it should be either or. That because it should be possible to do both, where you still go into, pursue your IMF thing, but there must be some bilateral relations that should be able to throw out. We have African countries very well endowed, Angola and whatnot, with good, you know, diplomatic, you know, economic policy arrangements. It should be possible to shell out some millions on softer grounds and whatnot. It may take a little time, but it may move faster than even the IMF. And then the pain that the IMF, Bretton Woods thing we inflict may not be what it is. So I think that it's sort of appearing for it to be like either or, combine the two, then see that kind of diplomacy where our diplomats don't become just a champagne diplomat. They go in for economic diplomacy,
But I'm not sure Dr. Botchwey put it out as if it's either or. Did he?
Actually, he says
See, this is what he says. He says, as a nation, as a nation, we must understand that borrowing from any source, including the financial markets, does not come with conditions that are not different really from those that come with drawings from the International Monetary Fund, or even grants from bilateral development partners. We can decide, as we evidently have, in the exercise of our national sovereignty, not to resort to drawings from the IMF, which are medium to long term and cost much less in interest than what we pay on the financial markets. But we must understand that borrowing from these markets comes with pretty much the same conditions, and thus moreover increase our vulnerability to changes in market sentiment. Nothing comes free. The markets will require you to adopt policies that make for macroeconomic stability with low deficits, preferably funded without undue recourse to money printing. The expansionary fiscal policy that we have pursued in recent times is inimical to growth and employment generation. That's why I don't see the either or.
Okay. Let me just share with you a few of the messages that have come in here. Answer Sasraku Kwajo says, hi Samson, the flooding, okay, still on the flooding issue. The flooding was serious, and Abogba and Pantang Road. Okay, thank you for bringing that to attention. Samuel Bryan says that, was the structure of the economy different when NDC was yelling on the rooftops in 2012 that the economy was about to fly? Did Mahama not tell us in March that the fundamentals were strong? Dr. Bamia predicted this calamity, and there is no doubt that the overexpenditure in 2012 is the reason we are in this mess. Don Pino says that each and every one of the Supreme Court judges prescribed electoral reforms in their final judgment. So, no, that's not correct. 2 of them. So what is Afarijan telling us? Is he saying that he is above the laws of Ghana and wiser than anyone? What has he said? I thought he said that this matter should be discussed at IPAC. All the opposition parties must ensure that we audit the voters' register and conduct every reform necessary before we proceed to do any registration. Now, John Owusu says, it is respectfully submitted that it is not all the parties who are articulating for the prosecution of the presiding officers. It is Seydou Nketieh's assertion. And Dahmani Abdul Karim says, Samson, I'm sorry, Seydou Nketieh did not make this proposal in the courtroom. He should keep quiet. The way some of you put it. Victor Asante says, our president appears publicly to be on top of his job with his usual maxim of, I have directed, I have instructed, yet what do we see? Our society keeps retrogressing every now and then. Felix Owusu Anani says something, I sometimes feel shy and ashamed that with all the available quality human resource that we have as a country, we are unable to solve our simple problems like flooding. Edmond Ajiman says the ignorance, ineptitude, and attitude of Ghanaians is the cause of the flooding. Bonti Benjamin says we always talk about floods in the country every year, but little or nothing is done. I think I read this, your message earlier on. I'll take a very final one. Clotia Nabi Opoti says that we need to be responsible, all of us, but we need our governments to put the welfare of the Commonwealth of Ghana above political power and take the decisive decisions that would bring to closure the annual water waste ritual that we all the time face. A few more from Bismarck. Asamang, is it Asankregwa? It says something, administrative sanctions cannot apply to the presiding officers because they do not come under the conditions of service which are applicable to the EC permanent staff. And then Kusono Ampem. Kosono, okay, Ampem in Spain says if all the parties have agreed to sanction any presiding officer, why then is Afarijan saying they cannot be sanctioned? Right.